Chapter 1, Introduction. Section 1, the chessboard and the starting position. Chess is played on a square board which measures 8 by 8 with 64 squares alternating between light and dark colors. When you set up the board, the light square is always on the lower right. The light square is always on the lower right, as shown by the arrow. There are 32 chess pieces, 16 white and 16 black at the start of the game. Each player picks a color and takes turns making one move, one at a time. White always makes the first move. The diagram below shows the starting position of the game. The following are the white and black pieces. There's the pawn, knight, bishop, rook, queen, and king. The table below shows the symbol and the letter used for the piece. Section 2, Chess Notation. In order to read and write chess moves, we need to understand the current algebraic notation used. In the chessboard, each square is based on a coordinate system with a letter used on the horizontal from A to H and a number on the vertical from 1 to 8. Here's a chessboard with coordinates marked on each square. The next diagram shows the names of each square on the chessboard. The names of files on a chessboard. Each vertical column of a chessboard is called a file. The files are given the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H from left to right on the white side of the board. The diagram below shows all the files. The names of ranks on a chessboard. Each row across the board is called a rank. We label them with the numbers 1 through 8, starting from the white side of the board. Section 3, How to write chess moves. To write down chess moves, we do the following sequentially. Number 1, move number. Always begin with number 1 to designate the first move in a game. Number 2, piece symbol. Which piece is being moved. Number 3, the square it is moving to. And number 4, add X between piece symbol and the square to show capture. In the diagram below, the move indicated by the arrow is 1, BH7. This means that the bishop moves to the H7 square on the first move. Number 1, BH7, means that the white moves his bishop to the H7 square on the first move. Chapter 2, the pawn. Section 1, pawn movement. Pawns only move forward one square at a time. They can never move backwards. They cannot jump over other pieces. If a pawn has never been moved, like it's in the starting position, it can move 1 or 2 squares forward. Since the white pawn has not moved, it has the option to move forward 1 or 2 squares. On the other hand, the black pawn has moved from its starting position, so can only move 1 square forward. Here, all the white and black pawns cannot move as they are blocked from moving forward. The white pawn on A5 is prevented from moving by the black pawn on A6. Similarly, the white pawns at E2 and G6 are blocked by the black's E3 and G7 pawns respectively. How a pawn moves. Section 2. Pawn capture. When a pawn captures, it does so by diagonally forward one square only. Capturing means taking the opponent's piece off the board and moving your piece to the captured square. It can capture forward only. It does not capture backwards. You are not forced to capture. Pawns capture diagonally forward one square. In the diagram, the white pawn at c3 can capture the black rook on b4, or the black queen on d4. On the other hand, the black pawn on g6 can capture the white bishop on f5 or the white knight on h5. How a pawn moves and captures. Remember, pawns move forward but captures diagonally. Section 3. The En Passant EP capture rule. The rule only applies for pawn capture under very special circumstances. The word en passant in French means in passing. So as a pawn moves two squares initially, you can capture the pawn as it is passing by. For white EP applies when 1. White's pawn is on the 5th rank, black's pawn is on the 7th rank, 3. The black pawn advances two squares in one move. When EP rule applies to white. White has potentially two chances for EP in this position. Number 1, black moves the pawn to b5 from b7, and white captures by moving the a5 pawn to b6 and removing black's b5 pawn. Or number 2, black moves the pawn from f5 from f7, and white captures by moving the e5 pawn to f6 and removing black's f5 pawn. EP does not happen often in a game, but it is useful to know this rule when playing. You can use the EP rule only immediately after the opposing side moves his pawn by two squares in the special circumstances mentioned earlier. If you decide not to do EP immediately, you cannot do it later. The EP rule for white and black pawns. Section 4. Pawn promotion. When a pawn reaches the end of the board, it can transform itself into any piece of the same color. It must transform to one of the following pieces: queen, rook, bishop, or knight. It cannot transform to a king, and it cannot remain a pawn. Pawn promotion before promotion. White's next move is to move the pawn to g8. This move is recorded as g8 equals queen. Pawn promotion after promotion. Once a pawn gets to the 8th rank, it converts itself to a queen in this case. It can convert to a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. It is up to the player converting to choose which piece to convert to. Pawn promotions. A pawn, when it reaches the end of the board, 8th rank for white and 1st rank for black, can promote to one of the following pieces: queen, rook, knight, or bishop. Chapter 3. Rook. Section 1. Rook move and capture. Rooks can move any number of moves, horizontally, along the ranks, or vertically, along the files. They can move forward or backwards, or left or right. Rook moves horizontally, along the rank, or vertically, along the file. Here, any square on the fourth rank or the D file as shown by the blue outlined squares. They cannot jump over a piece. They cannot capture a piece of the same color. Rook movement blocked by pieces. In the diagram, the rook is restricted to the moves shown by the blue outlined squares. The rook can go forward to d5 and d6. d7 is occupied by its own pawn. It cannot go to d8 because it cannot jump over a piece. The squares that the rook can move in the diagram are d5, d6, d3, e4, f4, and g4. Rook captures the same way they move. In the diagram, the rook can capture either the pawn, bishop, knight, or queen. Remember that a rook cannot jump over a piece or capture its own piece. Here, the black rook can capture the white bishop or queen. It cannot capture the white pawn at a4 because it is blocked by its own pawn on b4. How a rook moves and captures. To demonstrate how a rook moves, we assume that black does not move. Chapter 4, Bishop. Section 1, Bishop move and capture. A bishop can move any number of moves diagonally. It can move forwards or backwards. In the diagram above, the bishop is a light squared bishop and can move diagonally as many squares as shown by the arrows. A bishop cannot jump over a piece. It cannot capture a piece of the same color. Bishop movement blocked by pieces. In the diagram, the bishop is restricted to the moves shown by the blue outlined squares. Here, the light squared bishop is limited to the moves shown by the blue outlined squares. The bishop cannot move to c2 as it is blocked by the knight. A bishop can only move on squares of one color, the light square and dark square bishop. If you have two bishops shown in the diagram, they can never cross paths because the white bishop will always be on the dark squares, only while the black bishop will always be on the light squares. Bishops capture the same way they move. Bishop capture. In the diagram above, the bishop can capture the pawn, rook, knight, or queen. Remember that a bishop cannot jump over a piece or capture its own piece. Bishop capture is only possible when it is not blocked. The bishop cannot capture the knight on a8 as it is blocked by its own pawn at b7. Similarly, it cannot capture the white queen as its path is blocked by the black pawn at g6. The bishop can capture the white rook or pawn. How a bishop moves and captures. Notice that the bishop can never capture the queen in the diagram above because the bishop will always be on the dark squares while the queen is on the light square. To demonstrate how a bishop moves, we assume that black does not move. Chapter 5, Queen. Section 1, Queen move and capture. A queen moves like a rook and bishop combined. It can move diagonally, like a bishop, and along the ranks and files, just like a rook. It can also move in any direction, as many squares as she likes, as long as there are no obstacles on her way. The queen can move to as many squares as she likes, as shown by the arrows. The queen cannot jump over pieces, just like the rook and the bishop. The queen captures the same way that it moves. The queen is a very powerful piece because of its movement capabilities. Queen capture. The black queen can capture the white rook at g8 or the white pawn at d2. It cannot capture the rook at d1 because it is blocked by the pawn at d2. It also cannot capture the white bishop at g5 because it is blocked by the black knight at f5. Power of the queen. The diagram above shows the power of the queen. In the diagram above, the black queen can capture any of the 8 white pieces. Queen's power by moving to b5. The diagram shows the power of the queen by moving 1 qb5 while it is attacking both rooks simultaneously. After moving to qb5. The diagram shows the position after the move 1 qb5. The queen is simultaneously attacking the rook at a6 and f1. How a queen moves and captures. To demonstrate how a queen moves, we assume that black does not move. Chapter 6. Knight. Section 1. Knight move and capture. The knight's move is basically 2 squares up or down, then 1 square sideways, or 2 squares sideways, then 1 square up or down. This movement looks like the letter L. It is the only piece that can jump over other pieces of either color. It can move in any direction. The knight can move to any of the 8 highlighted squares. How a knight moves. How a knight jumps over pieces. The knight can jump over pieces and can move to any of the 8 squares highlighted. To demonstrate how a knight moves, we assume that black does not move. A knight captures the same way as it moves. Like all other pieces, a knight cannot capture a friendly piece, the same color. The white knight can capture the black rook or queen. Knight blocked from moving. The diagram shows that the white knight cannot move because it is blocked by its own white pawn and bishop. The white knight also has only 2 squares to move to, b3 and c2, but these squares are occupied by friendly pieces, so the knight cannot move. How a knight captures. To demonstrate how a knight captures, we assume that the black does not move. Chapter 7. King, Check, and Checkmate. Section 1. King move and capture. The king is the most important piece of the game. If the king is captured, the game is over. The king can move one square at a time in any direction, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. The king can move to any one of the highlighted squares. Like all other pieces, except the knight, the king cannot jump over pieces or move onto a square occupied by a piece of the same color. King move blocked by own pawns. The king can move to d5, f5, d3, and f4 only. In the diagram, the king cannot move to e5, d4, e3, and f3 as it is occupied by its own pawns. The king captures the same way that he moves. King capture. The white king can capture the black knight, bishop, or pawn. The capture is optional. How a king moves and captures. To demonstrate how a king moves and captures, we assume that the black does not move. Section 2. Check. In chess, if your king is captured, you lose the game. If you capture the opponent's king, you win the game. When a king is threatened to be captured by an opponent's piece, it is said to be in check. Since you cannot allow the king to be captured, on your following move, you must get the king out of check. Check by rook. White's last move was moving the rook from a6 to d6. The black king is now in check, as the white rook threatens to capture the black king. Check by knight. Black's last move was moving the knight from f5 to g3. The white king is now in check, as the black knight threatens to capture it. Check by bishop. Black's last move was moving the bishop from a8 to f3. The white king is in check as the black bishop threatens to capture it. Section 3. Checkmate. If the king cannot get out of a check, it is checkmate. If the opponent's king is checkmated, you win the game. If you are checkmated, you lose the game. White to move. The black rook on e1 is checking the white king. Let's see if the white can get out of a check. First, try moving the king out of check. If the king moves to c1 or a1, the rook on e1 will capture the king. If the king moves to a2, b2, or c2, the rook on f2 will capture the king. Second, blocking the check. There is no other pieces to block the check. Third, taking the checking rook. There is no way for white to capture the rook at e1. Conclusion, it's a checkmate, and so black wins. How to checkmate with the queen. Black to move, checkmate in one move. Chapter 8. Castling. Section 1. Kingside, Queenside, and Rules. In chess, you are allowed only once to make a special move called castling. This is usually done to protect your king. This move involves the king and rook simultaneously moving. There are two ways of castling, one on the king side and the other on the queen side. Castling is optional, but in practice, most players do it for protecting the king. Let's see how to do a kingside castling. Part 1. Position before castling. Kingside castling is done in two parts. First, by moving the king from e1 to g1. Part 2, position before castling. Second, by moving the rook from h1 to f1. Part 3, position after castling. Kingside castling is done in one move by moving two pieces, the king and the rook. The king moves to the right 2 squares from e1 to g1, and the rook moves 2 squares to the left from h1 to f1. How to do a kingside and queenside castling. White does kingside castling. Black follows with queenside castling. How to draw. Section 1. Repetition of position by perpetual checks. In chess, if the same position occurs 3 times with the same player to move, a draw can be claimed by either player. Sometimes in a game, this threefold repetition is achieved by perpetual checks. Perpetual checks means that one player is continually checking the other king without checkmate. This repetition of checks can go on forever, and if the position is repeated 3 times, a draw can be claimed. Part 1. Draw by repetition by using perpetual checks by the queen. White to move. In this position, white is up in points with 3 extra pawns. White is forced to move the king to h1, only because of the check by the black queen. 1 kh1. Part 2. Draw by repetition using perpetual checks by the queen. Black to move. Black continues the checks with 1 qf1 plus 2 kh2 qf2 plus reaching the first diagram. These checks by black could go on forever. Fortunately, when the same position is reached 3 times, the draw can be claimed by repetition. Draw by repetition using perpetual checks by the bishop. White is losing as black has more points on board. Unfortunately, white is able to give perpetual checks with the bishop and draw the game. Section 2. By stalemate. Stalemate occurs when your king is not in check and you have no legal move. Then the game is in draw. In a checkmate, the king is in check, while in a stalemate it is not. There's a big difference in the result where checkmate is a win and stalemate is a draw. Black to move, draw by stalemate. Black's king cannot move to any square because they are all attacked by white's queen. Black has no legal move. Therefore, black is stalemated and the game is a draw. Checkmate is when a king is in check and has no legal move for the king to escape the check. Stalemate is when a king is not in check and has no legal move for all the pieces. Section 3. Other ways to draw. The other ways to draw are A. By agreement. You and your opponent can agree to draw any time during the game. B. By 50 moves rule. The rule states that if for 50 consecutive moves, if you or your opponent do not move a pawn, or if no capture is made, you or your opponent can claim a draw with the 50 moves rule. C. Insufficient material. If you or your opponent do not have enough pieces to checkmate, the game is a draw.